Thank you, Jeff. It's a real honor and delight to be here with all of you. I will simply say names and titles in order to maximize time with our brilliant guests. We will start with Sharon Hewitt Rawlette on the impossible efficacy of intention, Psi as a model for value-based holistic causation. Welcome.
Hello. We're on the home stretch, guys. We're on the home stretch. I was a little bit worried about being scheduled during nap time on the last day of the conference. Hopefully I will keep you awake. So I want to talk about a very ambitious philosophical project that I am working on, trying to solve a long-standing mystery in mainstream philosophy of mind using clues from the operation of psi. This mystery that philosophers of mind have been wrestling with for, at this point, centuries, ever since we developed the modern concept of the physical world, is how the seemingly non-physical aspects of the mind could have causal effects on the physical body. Today, more and more philosophers recognize that there are aspects of the mind that even if they are correlated with things that are happening in the body or happening in the brain, that they're not reducible to these things. They are something more. If you think for a minute about what it's like to experience different colors, if you think about what it's like to hear different sounds or taste different foods, or feel pleasure, or feel pain. No matter how much you know about how neurons function, or how any other aspect of the brain functions, if you have not yourself had the experience of seeing a color, or hearing a sound, you are not going to be able to deduce purely from the neurophysiological information what that experience would be like. There is something more than just the physical facts that are accessible to a third-party investigator that's, looking at your brain or your body. So the question is, if there is something more, how does that interact with the physical part here? So we think we have this pretty complete physical story about how our body works, right? And how our brain works. We have a brain state at one point, and then that leads to a brain state at the next point, leads to a brain state at the next point, produces behaviors, it produces the words that are coming out of my mouth. So if we have this seemingly complete causal story, where do those felt qualities of our experience enter into that causal story? Does the way that things feel to us make a difference to the words that we say about them? Is what I'm telling you about the colors and the sounds, does that come from my actual experience of it? Is that entering into the causal process? And if it is, how is it doing that? Now, philosophers have come up with different ways of trying to solve this problem. I don't have time to go into those ways, but it doesn't matter because none of them work, so we'll move on to something that has some potential. The reason that I don't think that any of them work is that they are starting with a very smallest view of the causal abilities of the mind. Now, smallism is a term that was coined by the philosopher Sam Coleman. It's really what many of you probably know as reductionism, but I like the term smallism because it's very pithy and because it is more explicit about what it is that we're reducing everything to. So smallism is the view that everything that happens in the world can be explained in terms of what's happening in the smallest parts of that world. Whereas holism says that, no, there are properties of the whole. There are things that are true of the whole that cannot be reduced to the properties of its parts. Now, some philosophers and scientists are finally starting to take seriously this more holistic way of looking at the causal abilities of the mind, and I think that's largely because the big advances in 20th century physics those ones that happened 100 years ago, quantum mechanics and relativity theory, well, they're finally making their way into some other fields, which is great. So we are seeing now the rise in popularity in quantum theories of consciousness. I mean, they've been around for decades, but now people are really starting to talk more about them. There was a great book that came out last fall, Consciousness and Quantum Mechanics, edited by Sharon Hewitt. If you are interested in sort of the technical, philosophical, or scientific aspects of this topic, that's definitely a book to check out. But as heartening as it is to see holism about mental causation being taken more seriously, I don't think that the holism that is being considered right now is nearly whole enough. I think that the realm of mental causation is more expansive than just what's happening between some entangled particles within a single person's brain. And I think that because of all of the impossible phenomena that we have been talking about here for the last couple of days. Amidst all of the variety of these experiences, all of their mystifying strangeness, there is this underlying current of connection between the mind, and not only the body, but the rest of the world external to the body. One of my specialties within the study of parapsychology is coincidence and synchronicity. How external events line up in meaningful ways at a rate above what we would expect by chance. And I think that it's those wider mind-matter correlations that could hold the key to understanding how the mind interacts with the physical world in general and with the brain in particular. So how would that work? What would that kind of a model look like? Causality, to the extent that we currently understand it, I think can best be described in terms of organizing principles, also known as natural laws, that describe the way that the relationships among things evolve over time. And what I want to suggest is that in addition to the organizing principles that are recognized by current physics, there is a mind-based organizing principle that allows each of us to directly influence the nature of our own experience and to influence that experience toward the things that we desire, the things that bring us pleasure, the things that feel good and valuable, and away from the things that bring us pain or suffering. Now, one of the first questions that a lot of people are going to have is it possible for there to be an organizing principle in addition to the principles of physics? Doesn't that contradict what we think we already know about how the physical world works? So I want to start by explaining how this additional mind-based organizing principle can operate in a way that is entirely consistent with the physical laws that we observe. The first thing to understand is that our knowledge of the present state of the physical world, combined with our knowledge of physical laws, always underdetermines the next state of the world we are going to observe. The physical laws plus our knowledge of the present state of the world are not enough to predict exactly what's going to happen next. And this is because our knowledge of the current state of the world is always very far from being complete. And that is true quite apart from quantum mechanics, quite apart from Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You can stick with classical Newtonian mechanics, and it is still true that there is always imprecision in our knowledge about the position and velocity of middle-sized objects. Not to mention the fact that we are simply incapable of having knowledge about all of the objects that exist in the universe. And also, aside from the fact that there's some self-referentiality problems when you're trying to have all the information. You have to have all the information about all of your information, and how do you represent all of that? So I'm not going to talk about that. Sticking just to the idea of imprecision in measurement, even the tiniest bit of imprecision over the course of time and continuing interactions is going to produce greater and greater uncertainty about what future states of the world we will observe. There's been some really interesting work on the implications of this that's been done by Philippe Guillemot and some of his French colleagues at the CNRS. I don't know if Philippe is watching. I hope that he is. He's definitely involved in these circles. Given the imprecision in the observations that we've already made of the physical world, there's still a huge variety of things that we could observe next that would all be entirely physically consistent with our past observations. There's a whole range of ways that the world could evolve that are consistent with what we have seen in the past. And that means that there is plenty of room for our intention and our desire about the kind of experience we would like to have to make a selection among those different possibilities that are all conformant to physical laws. And I believe we do see that kind of selection playing out in people's lives. We call it psi, we call it ESP, we call it manifestation, we call it very good luck. But whatever we call it, what we are seeing is non-local correlations between how people feel about things and how frequently they experience those things. Now, I think that psi, which we could also call the direct efficacy of intention, is a very basic, fundamental process that is constantly in operation. But it's true that most of the time we don't feel like our desires are directly efficacious, that we can, see what we want to see in the world, or we can get things to happen just because we want them to. And we do know that psi manifests in a very fickle and elusive way. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that's happening all of the time. But I think that it nevertheless might be. And the reason I think that it feels like psi is so rarely effective is that our experiences are connected to the experiences of a huge number of other minds, and they're connected to a huge number of other experiences that we are going to have at other times. And because of the correlations that have to hold between our experiences of something and other people's experiences of that same thing, and because of correlations that have to hold between our experiences now and our experiences yesterday and tomorrow, our present intention in this moment is very far from being the only intention that's affecting what we are experiencing now. All of those other intentions through time and all of these other intentions generated by other minds whose experiences are linked to ours are holistically selecting among the various possibilities that are available to us. And this would help explain, among other things, why when we look at psychokinesis seems to be so much more effective in groups of emotionally bonded, like-minded individuals. Suddenly you've got people whose desires are reinforcing each other instead of interfering with each other. But what really excites me is the potential that this theory has to explain more basic and more reliable forms of mental causation. Could the direct efficacy of intention be at the root of our ability to control the movements of our own body, for example? There have been other parapsychologists who have suggested this. Stephen Browdy has talked about it, Jewel Eisenbud, both of them have written about it in print. But nobody, as far as I know, has really developed a full theory of how this would work. And that's part of what I'm trying to do. One of the reasons I think that we need to take seriously the possibility that the direct efficacy of intention is at the root of our everyday ability to control our body is that this is generally what controlling our body feels like. If you think about, if you want to walk across the room, you don't have to think about what muscle contractions need to be made. You don't have to think about what motor neurons need to fire, or certainly not what neurotransmitter molecules need to be released into which synaptic clefts. All you have to think is something vaguely like, I want to be over there. And then your body figures out how to coordinate all of these different actions to get you to that place. So when the body is healthy and it's functioning well, controlling that body feels like psychically directly willing into being an outcome. But if the same process lies behind both our ability to affect our bodies and our ability to affect the rest of the world, why does intention seem so much more effective with regard to our bodies than the rest of the world? To figure that out, I think that we have to look at cases where direct intention is not very effective with regard to our bodies. For instance, when we're babies, or when even as adults we're learning some new physical skill or some new mental skill, or when something has gone wrong in the body, whether in the central nervous system or elsewhere. When our minds and our bodies do appear to function as one without friction, it's because we're willing states of our bodies that from a purely physical or mechanical standpoint are easy to carry out. There are some relatively probable physical paths that lead from our current bodily state to the one that we want to get to. And that's because our bodies are these complex systems that are interconnected in intricate ways, and they're able to develop further interconnections over time, so they can actually be tuned to produce certain kinds of behaviors. And it's easy for the mind to will into being something if it's one of these behaviors that the body has already been tuned to produce, where it already has the structural organization that's coordinated in the right way to get from here to there. It's similar to the way that it's much easier, psychically speaking, to get something to happen that already has, some probability, a pretty good probability of happening. If you take an example of just rolling a die, it's much easier to get that die to land on a particular one of the faces than it is to get the die to levitate. It's not that it couldn't levitate. We know in this room, we know that things do levitate sometimes. It's just that in order to get that die to levitate, there are lots of physical forces that are going to have to be applied to it in just the right way. And the idea that all of these microphysical events would happen and line up in just the right way to all push the die in this certain direction, that's very, very unlikely. But the human body, in a sense, is a levitation machine, right? You can use your body to put the forces in just the right place to pick that die up and get it into the air. Because the body already works together in concert. As long as the kinds of things that you want are the kinds of things that the body can easily accomplish, then it's going to be much more likely for the physical world to accomplish your goal by using your body than by harnessing billions of uncoordinated atoms and making them all move in a particular direction. Because there's already that level of coordination existing in the body among its parts. It's already a system that's very far from equilibrium and that is tuned toward the specific kind of event that you want. And that's what makes bodies and brains excellent receivers for consciousness. It's not that the brain produces consciousness the way that so many think about it right now. It's that their physical organization is particularly good at responding to the kinds of things that consciousness wants. Bodies are good tools for consciousness. And I don't think it's an accident either. I think actually there's an evolutionary story to be told about how consciousness has shaped the way that bodies are how they are. Our minds have created these tools over evolutionary time. So if you're a mind trying to will into being a particular experience, that experience is more likely to come about by a means that was already most disposed to produce it, which is generally going to be by means of your body or some other normal-seeming channel. And this next line was already in my talk before Bernd Christian spoke, but I was saying, psi takes the path of least resistance. So I love the fact that he had that in one of his quotes. That's why the effect of intention is generally so normal as to be practically invisible. Now, the place to look for more extraordinary examples of psi is precisely in cases where all the ordinary ways of meeting a need have broken down. If it's generally easy for us to think about our world as this clockwork mechanism that just kind of, grinds along oblivious to what any of us want or, desire, I think that in large part, it's due to the fact that we have established pretty reliable means of meeting our needs on a day-to-day basis. We don't need miracles. We have things like the internet and other tools. This theory, according to which psi is always at work, but it's always using the most probable path to the goal, would explain why accounts of miracles are more common in societies and in situations where people don't have that same level of control over their daily lives, whether that's for technological reasons, socio-political reasons, because of racism, because of political conflict, because people are trying to survive extreme circumstances or catastrophes. And it would explain why we see psychic abilities very prominently among individuals who have lived in abusive domestic situations, for example, where it's very hard for them to predict where the next threat is going to come from, when it's going to arrive, and they develop the sixth sense to help them meet their needs in that unpredictable situation. It could also explain why people who have difficulty communicating seem to have a higher incidence of paranormal experiences. We've had surveys of people with autism, for example, who report more paranormal experiences than neurotypical people. People who face a lot of daily struggles tend to have more stories about amazing, improbable events. And I certainly know that in my own case, the most amazing things that have happened to me, even though they're not very amazing compared to the other stories in this room, they are things that happened when I was deeply struggling, when there was a problem that I had no way of solving, until this very improbable event came along and resolved the issue in a very unexpected way. Now, of course, it's not true that a solution always comes, because as I said before, our desires, our needs, our intentions are not the only ones that are affecting what we experience. But at the same time, there is also clearly suggestive evidence that our intentions do influence the world in a direct, holistic fashion. I think a psi-based model of mental causation has the potential to unify our understanding of reality in a very important way, and to give us a way of explaining scientifically what most human cultures have taken for granted, that the world around us is intelligently responding to our desires and our needs. It's just that the more predictably our environment is able to meet those needs, the more predictable and invisible psi becomes. Psi is so integral to the functioning of our world that it's hiding in plain sight.